Could you recap the title, please? What exactly has Israel said? Basically, Israel blamed the hospital bombing on a failed Islamic Jihad rocket. After the in-depth analysis by the New York Times, they have declared that Israel's assertion that the bombing or the explosion at the hospital in Gaza was caused by a failed rocket is not supported by the evidence. Israel lied.
Hello again, I'm James Bays. Refugee camps, hospitals, apartment blocks, nowhere in Gaza is safe in Israel's bombardment of the besieged territory. The humanitarian needs are dire and growing by the minute, yet Israel's biggest ally, the United States, is still not calling for a ceasefire. Instead, it's sending more military assets to the region. Washington says the aircraft carriers and naval support vessels will serve as a deterrent. But could American troops...
Pierce Mohammed apologizes. That's like Pierce Morgan.
Plenty for us to discuss with our panel in a bit. But first, this report from Sarah Gill.
A grim milestone. 18 days into the war on Gaza, the Israeli bombardment has killed more than 5,700 Palestinians. Daily life in the besieged territory is synonymous with the unpredictability of airstrikes. But throughout the offensive, the United States has maintained an unwavering commitment to Israel.
We must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel.
By the way, chat, this is exactly how you sleepwalk into World War III. This is the first time I've really thought that Joe Biden is going to put us into World War III, because this is how you sleepwalk into World War III. Basically, an empire, a slow, doddering empire on its last legs with way more military equipment than it has sense and an aura of invincibility, creates entangling alliances with small provinces that are in direct conflict with their neighbors. And then we just give them an unlimited blank check to fight in every direction and commit horrifying war crimes to the point where the countervailing forces have to respond. And then because of our commitments, when our little outpost starts getting defeated, we have to rush in to back them up. That's how you get into World War III. That's how World War I happened. World War II happened because of basically a failure to recognize that German Nazism was expansionist and anti-democratic, and being more concerned with containing the Soviet Union than fascism. That was what most Western leaders were doing. They are also some of the most depraved leaders in the world. MBS Netanyahu are insane. Yeah, exactly. Last night I watched a Gaza live stream and Israel dropped what I assume were cluster bombs. It was insane. Yeah.
We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs.
We saw
to
that
take care of
yesterday
its
about
citizens,
Biden only being up in New York by
defend
9.
and respond to this attack.
While international calls for an immediate ceasefire grow louder.
Is this an official prediction of escalation into World War III? I think at this point we can't say something that wild, but I will say that if Israel actually pushes with a ground invasion of Gaza, it will be the IDF Stalingrad. Maybe they will end up, maybe it will be the liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, or maybe it will be Stalingrad. I can't tell yet which. But it's not going to be the same as just dropping bombs on innocent civilians. They're going to have to actually fight. And territory that they're not familiar, on the offense, against people who are fighting for their very survival. What do you think about reports of U.S. bases getting hit? I thought we were not in Syria and Iraq. What happened? I guess we're just invading and occupying more countries. What happened? How do we even have bases there? My personal opinion is if there's a U.S. military base getting attacked, Makes sense. I condemn the terrorists, but it makes sense. Analysis is not endorsement.
Order. The US and other Western allies have refrained from asking Israel to scale back its attacks on Gaza. Instead, Washington has sent not one, but 2 aircraft carriers and their strike groups to the region. Each.
Jack, can you imagine if just 2 diesel electric subs slip into the Mediterranean and just launch 5 torpedoes at each one of these carriers and just sink it? Just utterly fucking humiliate the United States with these bloated wastes of space and money.
Has roughly 7,500 military personnel. It's one of the largest deployments of US troops to the Mediterranean in decades.
This additional deployment sends another message to those who would seek to widen this conflict. As President Biden said,
there are subs
earlier,
around them, but are the subs on active sonar mode? No.
You've heard me say, if any group or any country is looking to widen this conflict and take advantage of this very unfortunate situation that we see, our advice is don't.
Iran's foreign minister has accused the White House of double standards.
We've received messages asking us to practice restraint and also asked us to invite others to show restraint, but the US over the past 2 weeks has been sending military equipment to Israel. So how can they say they don't want the expansion of war? Now I'm saying to Biden, stop your hypocrisy.
The US hopes its support for Israel and its own increased military presence in the region will be enough to prevent the conflict from widening. But it's
Hey guys, I don't know if you noticed this, but this is training footage.
also clear that any miscalculation between Iran and the United States risks changing the dynamics of this war very quickly. Sarah Gill for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our panel of guests to discuss all this further. In Doha, we have Colin Clark, who's Director of Research at the Soufan Group, a global intelligence and security consultancy. In New York, it's Omar Rahman. He's a fellow at the Middle East Council on Global Affairs, where he focuses on Palestine, Middle East geopolitics and American foreign policy in the region. And in Boston, it's Glenn Carl, career CIA officer. He's a former Deputy National Intelligence Officer for transnational threats at the agency. Great to have you all with us to discuss what is going on in the region.
Look at this Hamas network chat with the CIA agents.
And particularly what's
Gold
going
smog,
on with
actually,
regard
tier
to
one.
the US deployments, because more and more US assets are going to the region, particularly naval assets. Some people say it's the biggest armada that's been seen in the region since the 1990s. Glenn, would you agree with that?
Well, I don't know if that's true, but I certainly believe that it is true. 2 aircraft carriers bring along as part of their combat. I forget the term slips my mind for the moment, but in any event, they deploy with probably a dozen ships or more each. So I think that's probably a true statement, yes.
And Colin, I've been looking, it's quite hard, quite opaque to get information off the Pentagon website, but reading through all the transcripts and everything that's out there in public, as Glenn says, I mean, we've got the largest warship in the world, the USS Gerald Ford. We've got another aircraft carrier, so 2 aircraft carriers, the Dwight D. Eisenhower, which is also there. And then I think a total of 8 warships in their 2 strike groups. And then we've got something called the Bataan Amphibious Ready Group, which has on 3 ships a total of 4,000 sailors and Marines on it. This is a very large deployment, isn't it, Colin?
Yeah, it's a massive muscular response from Washington. Multiple carrier strike groups, Patriot batteries, THAAD, missile defense. This is about.
We're not going to allow it.
So in other words, they're going to basically put the United States in the position to enter a world war. This is fucking insane. And I want to say this, if Biden gets us involved in a war in Iran, I'm voting for the other guy. Whoever that is. I'll figure it out later. All I know is I'm outie. He will lose 40 fucking states. Cornel West, here we come.
Any jargon, just tell me what THAAD is, please, quickly.
Terminal high altitude air defense, missile defense, essentially force protection, deterrence, and then if need be, some potential offensive assets. There's also intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance on these carrier strike groups as well. So all around preparation from Washington in case things do escalate.
And Colin, staying with you, what is your reading of the main reason for sending so much to the region?
I think, first of all, it's deterrence. It's a warning to the Iranians. It's a warning to Iranian-sponsored groups like Hezbollah to remain on the sidelines, or at least to keep activity at a very low and manageable level. But again, it's also to protect the bases that the United States has in the region. It's about force protection. And lastly, it's about preparation. The Biden administration is still stung from the withdrawal from Afghanistan, how poorly things went there. And they want to be prepared in case they need these assets, including to evacuate American citizens from a number of countries in the Middle East.
Omar, let me ask you how you think this will be seen in the region, because one person's deterrence could be another person's provocation.
Yeah, I think opinion on this will be split in the region to some extent based on your relationship with the United States and where you're coming from and how you're viewing the current conflict. Although I think across the Arab world, there is
Old Man Garda, thanks for the 18 months. Appreciate you.
This escalating. And, in some senses, maybe not a provocation, but certainly the U.S. is escalating the situation by bringing in huge naval forces into the region. And it's in a sense emboldening Israel to carry on what it's doing in Gaza. And that is obviously the source of the escalation at the moment. That is the reason why there's anger erupting across the Arab world. That would be the reason why you might see attacks on U.S. military bases in the region, or what we've seen, maybe Houthi rebels firing rockets towards Israel, if that's actually where they were headed. So at the heart of it, it's emboldening Israel, I think, to carry out this mission in the region.
Glenn, to see if I'm right with my assumption here. My assumption is that they're sending this big armada because they can't use their military bases, air base in Doha and their naval base in Bahrain because of the circumstances right now. Does that seem correct to you?
Partially correct. It certainly would be a complicating factor to use forces out of Doha, given Qatar's relationship with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. However, I don't think that's really the primary reason. I think, as I believe it's Colin, the first speaker said, clearly to me, the primary objective is deterrence, dissuasion. The buildup is not really to enable the Israelis to act, but rather to keep the conflict from spreading, becoming a regional or even broader war. And I think that most, we call them Arab governments, but they're, in this instance, it's more relevant to say Muslim countries, understand that and don't want to see the conflict generalize, and so really are accepting of the U.S. deployment. Now, what we call the Arab Street is another matter, and Muslims, of course, will be dissatisfied and angered by what they will characterize as a provocation. But to me, clearly, the objective of the United States is to stop Iran's proxies from so provoking Israel or the United States that the conflict generalizes.
CIA agents, yay! Yeah. See, guys, the provocation is Iran, not the genocide of a captive population. That's not provocative.
Into a wider war.
Colin, we've talked about the deterrence role, but there's also a role in protecting US assets that are already in the region. Let me read you a quote from the Pentagon Press Secretary, Brigadier General Pat Ryder. "We will do everything and take all necessary measures to protect US forces." We've already seen some instances with regard to what has gone on in the Red Sea and what has happened in Iraq.
If Biden puts us in a war with Iran, That is by far and away the biggest foreign policy blunder in the history of the United States. If he does that and you still support him, there's nothing he could do.
In Syria. Let me take those one by one. First, in the Red Sea, there was a US warship, the USS Carney, which took down 4 land attack cruise missiles. We think they came from the Houthis. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, it seems likely. It's consonant with previous behavior and actions by the Houthis. And for the United States, it's just unacceptable. It's not going to allow its personnel or its bases to be targeted by any actor in the region.
And on that, Colin, do we know what the Houthis were aiming at? Because the Pentagon spokesman again said they took them down, but they didn't necessarily think they were aimed at the Carney and they were going in the direction of Israel. To your knowledge, do the Houthis have anything that could hit Israel?
It's possible. I think, they very well could have been headed that way. I think, one thing that this whole conflict has taught us is that we need to question prior assumptions, right? I think many people didn't think Hamas had the capabilities that it displayed on October 7th. So I would be very concerned about examining prior assumptions about the capabilities of Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi Shia militia, and others. I think, clearly the Iranians have helped them develop capabilities. They've given them all sorts of different hardware and missiles. And so at this point, we're still in the early stages of this conflict. We're hoping to keep it to a low boil. It's best to be in a defensive posture.
Glenn, we've also seen attacks in Syria and Iraq. There are still, based in Iraq, 2,500 US troops, and in Syria there are 900 US troops, but also a lot of military contractors. I think some people, to start with, would be quite surprised there are so many US troops still in Iraq and Syria. What are they doing?
Well, multiple missions. One, of course, is to continue to observe and try to stop ISIS or jihadist groups and elements from conducting terrorist operations and destabilizing things. Another is to help try to keep the governments in place from.
I'm getting confused with the upcoming election. Everyone on the right is saying, don't bother voting, it's rigged anyway. Whatever the left is saying, Biden's a ghoul who can't even stand correctly, let alone lead a country. Why should we vote for him? Like, what the fuck is going to happen next year? Well, the problem is that the boomer generation will never relinquish power. There will literally be 100-year-old boomers trying to run the Democratic Party. They're never, until every boomer dies, they will not give it up. And when they do give up power, they give it to the worst people in our generation by far. The most disgusting, corrupt, teachers' pet ass motherfucking losers who have zero charisma and who are pure opportunist sociopaths. All right? Personally, I think the boomers are going to hit the button before they go out. I think the boomer generation is so nihilistic, so solipsistic, so disgusting, they're going to hit the button on the way out. There's no fucking way they're going to allow themselves to die and all of us just carry on. Out of nihilistic, petty rage that they have to die, after sucking up all the wealth, after leaving the next generations far worse off, after ignoring crises like climate change, it wouldn't surprise me if they hit the button on the way out. Look at how many Arab Americans reside in the crucial swing states. They voted 70% plus in favor of Biden. Ain't happening again. So yeah, Biden is fucked. Yeah, I want to see polls. But I can tell you right now that my feeling is that Biden is toast. Like he's basically created huge problems for himself in Pennsylvania and especially Michigan. And he was already very unpopular. The way some of them talk, I can see it. I hear my boomer uncle laugh about climate change. She says, I'm going to be dead, so it ain't my problem. Like, I don't know. I don't think violence is ever the answer.
Being destabilized further by
Java Mel, thanks for the
terrorist
prime.
actions. And the third is, of course, to watch over, to the extent possible, Iranian efforts to extend its influence, which is a large component of what we're seeing happening with the Houthi, with the groups in Syria, with Hezbollah on the border, and with Hamas. And Iran is playing a cynical, very dangerous game. Destabilization and trouble, death and turmoil in Israel is a good thing for Iran because it's hostile to Israel on theological, philosophical, and political reasons, and two, because it helps Iran extend its influence. So one of the missions of the U.S. presence there is to try to keep this kind of destabilization from occurring, and really to stop Shia, meaning Iranian, influence from spreading even further than it has.
Omar, apparently we think about 8 attacks on US troops in 4 different locations in Iraq and Syria. And it's interesting reading what's been said by the US hierarchy. I've quoted the Pentagon press secretary before. We don't necessarily see that Iran has explicitly ordered them, yet the White House and the Strategic Communications Coordinator John Kirby, we know that Iran is closely monitoring these attacks and in some cases actively facilitating these attacks. What's your view on how involved?
Facilitating. Isn't that a nice little word? What the fuck does that mean? Does that mean they're giving them the weapons? Does that mean they're giving them intelligence? Does that mean they're giving them training? Does that mean they're giving them a pat on the back? What does that mean exactly? The United States of America provides literal guidance, targeting, logistics. It buys the bombs for Israel. Are we facilitating genocide?
Iran is. Is Iran ordering this?
Whether they're ordering the attacks in places like Syria and Iraq, I mean, it's probable given their links to those groups that are operating in those countries. I think it was a little overstated. I think in terms of their connection to the initial Hamas attack on October 7th. I mean, clearly they're a sponsor, a financial backer, material backer of Hamas, but they're a lot of the reporting that came up out of October 7th. Implied or directly asserted that Iran was heavily involved in the planning process. I think that is overstating the connection. But certainly, I think their connection is much deeper to the armed groups that are operating in Syria and Iraq. And so, I don't know whether they're directly involved, but it's worth considering for sure.
OK, back to you, Colin, because you brought up that acronym THAAD in the first place. What the US is deploying, it seems, because of these specific attacks in Iraq and Syria, is this Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, or THAAD, and also some additional, and there's no specified number here, Patriot battalions also. Just explain to me what these things do.
Patriot are missile defense batteries, surface-to-air missiles that are going to be used to guard against what we saw just the other day against the numerous attacks.
I heard hummus, so I'm here to condom. Yeah, JJ, that seems to be the only way to be.
Attacks and provocations from various Iranian-backed actors in the region.
Dick Cheney's oil money. Thank you for the 12 months.
Expects more of that in the days ahead. And so this is, again, a defensive and precautionary measure to protect United States assets. It's nothing more, it's nothing less. The Iranians, for their part, are doing what they always do. They're continuing to attempt to push the United States out of the region and extend their own influence.